To set up my first YouTube review properly, let me explain how we got here. It's mid-2022. I've been canned from a job I gave 5 years of my life to and forced to take whatever I can to survive. We're 2 years into 2 weeks to flatten the curve. My finances are in ruins. I'm spiraling into the pit of depression. The world is falling apart day by day, and it's all bad. You know, nothing special. So since I can't go out and do anything, we're mostly broke, and the world outside sucks, I start to think about things I can do that A, don't cost a lot of money, B, won't put me into contact with disgusting disease-carrying human beings, and C, will help me combat the suicidal depression I'm experiencing. So I go, hey, let's start a YouTube channel. The concept for this whole thing was essentially, what can I do that will allow me to express myself and have some fun, and is also mostly cheap. So I decided to dress up as a giraffe. We all coped with COVID differently. Don't judge me. At least I was wearing my mask. Anyway, when the last bits of my outfit showed up, I was kind of waffling on whether or not I was actually going to do this, because the whole idea of dressing up and putting out this side of myself seemed kind of crazy and daunting. Because you know what goes great with depression? Self-doubt. Mostly, I wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of showing the world what a dork I actually am. Later on, after discovering making a video is actually way harder than you think it is, and I'm dragging my feet, my wife sends me a frantic text with a Steam link. I recall this moment vividly. Badger writes, "You're not gonna f***ing believe this." I click the link, and I'm greeted by a top hat and monocle wearing giraffe who is explicitly described as a gentleman giraffe. Holy shit, guys. You have no idea what that did to my brain. I kept thinking, this can't be real. I just kinda sat there, staring at my computer in shock for a few minutes. Blink, blink. What? Okay, well, message received, the universe. Guess I'll keep doing this dumb thing that I'm doing. See, I had no idea about this game. None. Zero clue. In retrospect, that makes the whole weird coincidence even weirder. Somehow, independently, two absolute geniuses came up with the idea for a comedy thing based around a tuxedo-wearing ungulate. This is like the one thing in my whole life I should have known about. Seriously, it's like somebody ripped open my head and went, hey, let's make something this guy in particular will enjoy.
It's everything you like.
We'll talk about that somebody soon. She's pretty cool, I guess. See, okay, the giraffe thing. Giraffes are my favorite animal. You may have noticed. They're anatomically bizarre creatures who are simultaneously one of the most awe-inspiring and weird things we have on this earth. When you wake up in the morning and slam back a coffee, you also live in a world inhabited by giant camouflage-covered deer things who strip leaves off of trees with their 18-inch prehensile tongues. By the way, giraffes also clean their ears out with that same tongue. You're welcome for that mental image. So at what point, dear viewers, do you look at something as coincidence or fate? Do you know the difference? That was rhetorical, hey? Please tell me you didn't answer the screen. This isn't Dora the Giraffe. No, coincidence is something easy to wave away as random chance. You can reason it away and life goes on. Fate is something that's so specific and meaningful you can't ignore it. Let's get into this fated first review. I'm going to talk to you about one of the funniest and most profound video games I've ever had the privilege to play. It led to me giving this YouTube nonsense at least a semi-serious try. It pulled me out of a bad depression. It inspired me creatively, and it gave me the courage to go way out of my comfort zone as a weird introvert and conduct an interview with a published game developer as a complete nobody just because I had to talk to this gal. Which in turn was such a positive experience that it gave me the resolve to finally go out and act like an idiot in public, just like I had originally intended. So that's our story. In conclusion, every ridiculous thing I do from now on is directly the fault of Charlotte Sutherland. Now, on its surface, you might think this Lord Winklebottom thing looks really goofy. A comedy / murder mystery / point-and-click adventure game starring a talking English giraffe in a top hat and monocle. Okay, you think, as a hardcore gamer. So it's obviously a weird joke game made by some amateur and it looks dumb. Might be worth a few minutes of amusement before you shut it off and never look at it again. This isn't some lol random joke game. It's a hilarious and incredibly well-written comedy wrapped into a pitch-perfect homage to the old LucasArts and Sierra adventure games that I grew up with. The creator, a cheeky Brit, is an industry professional with over a decade of experience. The overall quality of this title cannot be understated. And also, don't be a cynical ass. I'm gonna dive into this thing, and by the end you'll understand my love for it. I will make you understand! So, welcome to the most appropriate first YouTube review of all time. It's a giraffe. Reviewing a giraffe. How meta. Roll the trailer.
Oh my god, he's dead! The master's dead!
This is a case for me, Lord Winklebottom, the great detective. A giraffe detective, that is. Journey to a mysterious island and investigate a grisly murder.
We shall have to get him out of there if I'm to do an autopsy. Can't very well determine the cause of death just by gulping him through the glass, you know.
Interrogate a cast of unusual suspects. Search for clues and solve fiendish puzzles.
Are you sure you know what you're doing? The Gilfrey estate will not be held liable for any damage or injury caused by incorrect operation of that device.
My word, this plant really does look frightfully tasty.
As Mel Brooks, John Cleese, or Leslie Nielsen would tell you, you have to play comedy straight. By that, I mean that however ridiculous or improbable your concept, the humor comes from how seriously it's delivered to the audience. Nobody in the world does this better than the Brits. Ask Fry and Laurie, Atkinson, Pegg, or any number of Britain's finest comedic minds. There's just an inherent wit to the UK that enables them to be some of the funniest people on the planet. I think it has to do with living in the never-ending sadness of their weather. Enter Charlotte Sutherland of Sheffield, England! Artist, animator, experienced game developer, educator, and just a charmingly weird lady. She also responds to her Twitter and shares videos from nobodies who just started a channel so they get a bunch of free views and subscribers. That's awfully nice of her, don't you think? The story here is that one day, inspired by recent trips to the zoo and a lot of Agatha Christie, which, let's face it, are not mutually exclusive concepts, she painted a snooty giraffe in a top hat. Giving a fancy monocle-wearing socialite an absurd-sounding comedy name was inspired lunacy that the boys of Monty Python probably would have adored. What followed were a series of paintings, all available from her Redbubble store incidentally, depicting fancy animals including a hippo named Dr. Reginald Frumple and an axolotl named Colonel Aristotle Gilfrey. According to Charlotte, a game idea began to form in her head based around these characters. She simply wanted to make something she'd enjoy herself. One does not simply make a modern video game without loot boxes, however. It took 4 years for Charlotte's quirky concept to become a financed and published title, during which this absolute mad genius developed the thing herself under her one-woman banner of cave monsters. She's the artist, animator, writer, and main developer. This is not an accomplishment to be taken lightly, and the effort that went into this uniquely oddball title outshines many modern games with huge studio budgets behind them. I also won't go into the health scare her husband had, but suffice to say it's a miracle this thing happened at all. Without further delay, let me introduce you to Lord Winklebottom Investigates. It's equal parts absurdist comedy, affectionate genre parody, dry British wit, whodunit murder mystery, 90s point-and-click adventure game, oh, and absolutely everybody is a talking animal. But a realistically drawn talking animal voiced by a professional voice actor. If this all sounds crazy and weird, it is. And the truly impressive thing is that this all works perfectly in context. My main point of this review is to look at why this game works so well, take it down to the nuts and bolts, and have a think about what we can learn about its game design, narrative structure, characterization, and themes. We'll also examine what makes a good comedy. I say, old thing, bad news from the island of Bargist. It seems that poor Aristotle Gilfrey has met his untimely end. You remember him, don't you? Was a Navy animal before he went off on a number of private expeditions. Liked to poke around in the dust, if I recall. I'm told he was about to make some big announcement. I suppose now we'll never know what he intended to unveil. Oh yes, I do wonder where that leaves poor Constance. Wasn't so long ago they lost poor Ethelberta. Such a tragic accident. I suppose that means she has come into quite a sum of money now. Small pittance for the grief the poor child has endured, what? Murder. How ghastly. Well, I suppose if there is villainy ahoof, it might do to bring in that Lord Winklebottom fellow. Why, he's just been in the papers again, hasn't he? The great giraffe detective, they say. What was that other fellow's name? Mr. Dumple, was it? Anyway, murder. Goodness, enough of these macabre thoughts, yes? More tea, chaps. It's jolly old England, circa 1920 some such. Our heroes, the dashing Lord Winklebottom and his faithful sidekick Dr. Reginald Frumple, have just cracked another case, and they've made the papers once again.
Never mind all that. What do they say about me?
Well, let me see. Yes, here it is. Lord Winklebottom was assisted, as ever, by his associate Mr. Frumple.
Mister? Dash it all, I didn't spend 8 years in medical school to be called Mister. Bunch of bloody hacks.
Well, Winklebottom has. Sorry, Frumple. After a spot of tea, they're off to visit Winklebottom's old childhood friend, Admiral Gilfrey, at his estate on the island of Bargist. The Admiral has sent a mysterious invitation where he plans to make an important announcement to a collection of seemingly random invitees. However, before they can depart, our heroes must convince their unreliable boatman, one Salty Walters, to stop drinking long enough to ferry them over before a terrible storm hits. Luckily, Winklebottom's quick thinking, talent for reaching high places, and bizarrely roomy trousers get them on their way. Where did he put an entire empty beer barrel?
Damned if I can figure out where you keep all this stuff, Winklebottom.
Doesn't matter. As they arrive on the island, Winklebottom learns from the distraught maid that poor Gilfrey is, dead. Our heroes must release the expired axolotl from his elaborate network of tubes within the house and perform an autopsy to determine if there was foul play. In doing so, they discover the worst. Aristotle Gilfrey was murdered. With the phone line cut and no outside help arriving, our dashing hero and his loyal partner must get to the bottom of this heinous crime to uncover the dark secrets lurking within.
Well, that was a tight squeeze. I can't really do much down here, but I can have a look around at least.
Which one of the guests present on the island could have killed Winklebottom's dear old friend, and why?
I suppose now we know why this salt is down here. Question is, who brought it here and to what end?
Oh, that's easy. It was the killer, and they brought it to poison Gilfrey.
Very insightful, Frumple, thank you.
What was the Admiral planning to announce? Where is the butler? And did he do it? What is this weird transparent stuff tangled around an octopus in a top hat? What's with all the inconvenient locked doors? Don't they know there was a murder to solve? Can you use a tie on a dead moose's mounted head for something? Are ghosts even real or just memories? And why exactly are all these plants so delicious?
I suppose a tiny nibble wouldn't hurt.
With danger, intrigue, and puzzles lurking around every corner, can Lord Winklebottom stick his neck out and solve the murder before it's too late? Will Frumple and Winklebottom's partnership survive this difficult case intact?
Look at this. Silly beggars have put the toilet roll on the wrong way round.
You know, between this and the tea fiasco, I sometimes feel like I barely know who you are anymore.
These questions and tea await us. If you've never played a mid-80s to late 90s adventure game, then welcome to a staple of the kind of gaming I grew up with. It's a proud tradition that goes all the way back to text-only interactive fiction on 5 1/4 floppy. The fact that 2 successive generations have no idea what I'm talking about right now means that I'll surely be dead of old age right after I finish this video.
You kids today with your Master Chiefs and Elven Rings. Back in my day, we had to figure out what insults to use during a sword fight.
Anyway, the point here is to lead our heroic giraffe detective around, explore the world, and help him solve various obstacles he encounters to access new areas, information, or interactions. Oftentimes, you'll need to pay close attention to the dialogue or the details of the world around you in order to figure out what to do next. If you get stuck, feel free to ask trusty Dr. Frumple what you should be doing right now, but don't expect him to hold your hoof, or hand. In any case, an imagination and basic problem-solving skills are all you need to enjoy this game. A sense of humor might help too. If you've ever played a mid-80s to late 90s adventure game, you'll be pleasantly surprised. Charlotte clearly set out to capture the overall tone and style of the older games we all grew up with, and it shows in the final product. To begin with, something I appreciated was that the interface has been streamlined down to a context-sensitive cursor.
It means context sensitive. It's sensitive to context.
It might have been tempting to pay homage to the older interfaces, but this means you'll be spending more time playing the game instead of trying to figure out what action you need to use. However, don't take this to mean the game is lacking depth. There's so much to do and see on every screen that you'll be satisfied as an old hand. So, for both new and old players, the main challenge of adventure games in general are the problems and puzzles you need to solve. There's a tricky balance to hit here between making sense and being anti-intuitive. Looking at you, Any King's Quest. Winklebottom, the game, hits that sweet spot perfectly and gives you a small treasure trove of memorable bits on the way. It's not too hard, but it doesn't dumb down the puzzles. As somebody who knows the genre very well, I wasn't wandering around wondering what the hell I was supposed to be doing in my first playthrough. All the clues you need are within the game itself, and if you're paying attention, the overall gameplay is very intuitive and easy to follow. There's the backtracking and repetition typical to these kinds of games, but if you miss something, then that's on you. So, talking about the game inventory. That's the stuff your giraffe winds up stealing from around the locations he visits to solve puzzles. The items you wind up collecting usually have a clear and utilitarian purpose. A good example is the boat hook, something long with a hook on the end. What do you think you'd use that for? To grab something out of reach, perhaps? Well, the game spells out what you need to do early on in the prologue and then leaves you to figure this stuff out in the later sections, as it should be. Thing is, the prologue also sets up a lot of the stuff you'll need to do later and gives you all the tools and skills you'll need for some of the harder puzzles. There were a couple moments on the first run where I knew I was missing something obvious and had to look up a guide, but then I had that oh god of course moment and I felt really dumb. So gameplay-wise, this is a fairly standard and well put together adventure game. The overall skeleton of the design is solid. That's about where the standard label ends though. The rest is exceptional. If I had to criticize one thing, it's that I wish there was more to solve, because the puzzle design is wickedly enjoyable and left me wanting more. I understand the restraint in not bombarding the player with constant puzzling though, and it's a very carefully considered design choice that allows the game to move along at a decent pace without becoming frustrating. This is the coolest section for me because I've gotten to speak to the creator at length about what she intended with her game and how she wrote it. There is a lot going on here that absolutely needs to be dissected. The main strength of Lord Winklebottom is the writing. I can't stress this enough. It takes less than 5 minutes in-game to establish the setting, tone, main characters, gameplay, and plot.
Oh my god, he's dead! The master's dead!
Well then, Frumple, that was quite the case, wasn't it?
Oh, indeed so. Already made the evening edition, don't you know? I picked up a copy when I went to buy the boat ticket. We'll be quite the heroes, I think.
Hopefully they don't dwell too much on the part where one of the Weasel gang cracked you over the head with a pool cue and nearly made off with all the gold, eh?
Wretched blighter caught me from behind. Just not cricket, is it?
Still, all worked out in the end, my friend, and just in time too, as you have this party with Admiral Gilfrey to attend.
Look, who is this chap anyway, Winklebottom?
Oh, Gilfrey's an old school friend of mine, top of his class, went on to become an admiral, then latterly undertook a number of privately funded expeditions to all 4 corners of the globe.
Bit of a swot then, eh? We had no time for his sort at my school.
Evidently so, my friend. Right, let's get this boat ticket and be on our way. Where is the ticket anyway, Frumple?
Oh, I slipped it into the newspaper for safekeeping.
Ah, do you remember this case?
Hox and Fox gang, wasn't it? Made a mint selling forgeries of famous works of art, until you stepped in.
That's right! Kept this one as a souvenir. It's a reproduction of the goat with a pearl earring. You know, we really must replace this waste paper bin. It's starting to look rather ragged.
Yes, and whose fault is that? Don't know why you keep buying these straw ones. You know you can't resist a nibble when you're peckish.
As I say, we should replace it. Yes, a nice new straw basket, I think. I'm rather fond of this scarf. Shame it's been on the short side though. A pot of tea. It's still brewing. One of Frumple's many teacups. A jug of milk, delivered fresh this morning, I believe.
Indeed, yes. Miss Daisy brought it over personally.
Winklebottom cracks the case. A touch sensational, but they appear to have got most of the salient facts correct.
Never mind all that. What do they say about me?
Ah, well, let me see. Yes, here it is. Lord Winklebottom was assisted, as ever, by his associate, Mr. Frumple.
Mister? Dash it all, I didn't spend 8 years in medical school to be called Mister. Bunch of bloody hacks.
Well, never mind that now, old boy. We have to get going if we're to catch this boat before nightfall.
No, I'm quite vexed now. I shan't leave until I've had a fresh cup of tea to calm me down. This one's practically tepid.
Oh, very well. I'll make you a fresh cup. The pot should be ready now. Ah, here's the ticket. I'll keep hold of this for now. Now to pour some out for the good doctor. I'll take this, good for the old bones, you know. And in with the tea. I put the milk in the cup. Here you are then, a nice fresh cup of tea.
Ah, that's much better. I say, this tastes a bit off. Did you put the tea in first or something?
Ah, was that wrong?
Wrong? Wrong? What sort of animal do you think I am?
A most fine one, my friend. Come along, we need to be off. The ticket says we are to meet a Mr. Walters at the docks, and he'll sail us out to Gilfrey's Island.
Oh, very well. I suppose this will have to do. Tea first, I ask you.
Just 5 minutes. The style of humor and the writing is consistent throughout the game. Every character you encounter is fully fleshed out and developed in your interactions with them. And all of this is anchored to a serviceable murder mystery plot that winds up hitting a wild third-act twist that was hinted at hours before it happens. Seemingly offhanded jokes and lines of dialogue set up later events in advance. The narrative is structured as an actual story instead of a collection of disjointed gags and memes. The takeaway is that on top of the underpinnings of the gameplay, there is actual substance. And as you play through, there's not a moment that takes you out of the world or seems randomly thrown in. Winklebottom is a masterclass on how to tell a story with a video game, and it's done by a skilled visual artist and animator who strictly obeys the rule of show don't tell. The result is that as you play through a quirky game, you'll find yourself engrossed with memorable characters and balanced comedy, and a story that is compelling and well executed. So, to start with, you have a murder mystery plot. It serves as the basis for everything else, and without it, this game would have been a mess. You know the conventions, you know the tropes. This is the solid foundation. Next, you make it a comedy. It's important to note that Charlotte didn't set out to make a joke-a-minute parody. She built up on a solid and timeless premise by taking further inspiration from a particular series of classic Sherlock Holmes adventures where she noted some funny elements worthy of being exaggerated for comedic effect. When I found this out during our interview, I was thrilled that I picked this up naturally. This is right out of the damn manual for how to write an effective comedy. There has to be substance, and there has to be a story holding the structure together. The third element I want to call out is the characters. Charlotte was specifically aware that she wanted the comedy and humor of the game to be generated from the situations that arise and not the characters themselves. In effect, she's doing the opposite of what Ethan Coen did with the disastrous Holmes and Watson, which is to establish likable and competent characters that funny things happen to, and having the comedy originate from their reaction. The characters themselves cannot be the jokes, and this is where a lot of modern writers go wrong. The wackier and zanier your characters, and especially the protagonists, the less relatable they are and the less we're invested in their story. If each scene is just a bunch of funny stuff happening, nothing is actually happening. It's also worth pointing out that every background character you encounter in this game is treated as integral to the plot. From the alcoholic boatman who kicks off your adventure to the one-off Cecil the Octopus, they are all tied into the main story and involved in the gameplay. Back to basic structure though. What this also allows is flexibility. Since Charlotte set up her game as a murder mystery first instead of a straight-up satire, she has the ability to go from serious to comedic moments without compromising the tone of the game. It doesn't have to be a laugh-a-second romp, or as she said, a clip show. which I took to mean a collection of funny moments without substance. It was actually kind of hard to make my out-of-context video because most of the funniest moments all have a specific context that makes them funny. But the point I'm making here is that we're able to go from serious to funny and back to serious for a reason, which is to establish emotional moments that help support the plot and allow the writer to explore things they couldn't without the grounding. This is why extreme absurdity and random humor only works for short bursts and can't be depended on in a comedic work. Without something else going on, it just becomes repetitive. Oh, something insane and over the top happened. What else you got? The fourth and final element is the message of this game. I'm saving a lot of this for the spoiler section at the end, but in choosing a dynamic approach that doesn't depend on its humor and is based in character, this allows you to explore deeper themes. You know, like the best comedies ever made. This ties it all together then, because your murder mystery plot with comedic elements winds up having a point beyond just entertainment, and that's where it gets really interesting. For now, you'll notice a recurring suggestion of something more thought-provoking lying under the jokes, and odd moments of uncomfortable commentary being thrown in. You'll want to pay attention to that. What was especially pleasing was the characters you meet, which I'll talk about more in a bit. But as I said before, a lesser developer would have taken the premise and reduced it to a few cheap jokes of little substance. Charlotte's comedy is focused and incidental to characters with distinctive personalities and motivations that are developed as the story progresses. Most of this isn't played for laughs, at least directly, and the impression is that the talking animals are actual people instead of zany cartoon characters. Now, the overall plot is something you already know, which is to say all the classic detective beats are here in force and fondly used. Our titular hero shows up, there's a dastardly murder to solve, and finally there's the big reveal where all the suspects are dramatically gathered in one room to expose the killer. Even with a healthy dose of dry wit and silliness going on, it still works as a narrative to hang the rest of the game on, and I again have to recognize that this was a very purposeful choice. By the end of the second act, because this game literally follows a 3-act structure, complete with title cards, I was totally into this thing and wondering how everything was going to tie up by the end. This is how well this game manages to handle itself, that it can go from pondering death itself to a witty crack from the sarcastic hippopotamus in more or less the same scene, without causing a whiplash of mood. A huge part of that is the dry Englishness of the whole thing, which is never over the top and always classy. Again, this is an insanely well-constructed narrative and story for something that could have devolved into an unhinged mess very quickly. The joke writing is quite silly in that innocent sense where you can safely laugh at something without feeling guilty. There are particular moments of really sly and dark comedy at times, but there is nothing outwardly offensive or risque in this game. I played the whole thing with my kids watching, which was refreshing. To put this all together then, this is a comedy game that had a clear and established story premise before the joke writing started. The characters in the game are treated mostly seriously, while the more comical moments are situational. The game alternates between tones skillfully in order to make a point by the end and to move the story along. It sets up its themes and central ideas in advance and pays them off later. The funny game about a talking giraffe detective does a better job of following basic story structure and characterization than a few $1 million worth of Hollywood movies. And I honestly think that the aspiring comedy writer should study how this is done here. At the very least, Lord Winklebottom represents a dying genre of comedy that was able to deploy subtlety to make a point, even while it made you laugh. The characters in this game are memorable as hell. They're not background objects in the game world that you can get away with not talking to, they're important to moving the plot forward. They also pretty much establish themselves by falling into time-tested archetypes. Everything from clothing choices to overall design is based in and for character. Because hey, guess what? A visual artist is really damn good at character design. When I tell you as a Canadian that there's a grumpy English gardener, you can picture the guy from 1,000 BBC sitcoms, right? Well, he's a Welsh garden slug here, complete with the trademark flat cap. The butler, the maid, a scientist, a surly barkeep. From a design standpoint, they're all ingeniously executed because the characters are immediately recognizable and play to type exactly as you expect them to. This is also a great misdirection because you know this is a murder mystery and you're never supposed to be exactly sure who is being sincere and who's putting on a show to deceive you. You're supposed to develop your own suspicions before the reveal. At least that's how this is supposed to work. The best part of the characterization is that Charlotte wrote them as people you could realistically encounter. The voice actors were clearly instructed to play the material seriously, which goes back to my opening point about what makes the absurd work. Hearing a goat, for instance, talking with the voice of a standard issue Cockney maid never ceases to be amusing.
My lord, whatever are you doing? Stop that this instant.
Oh, frightfully sorry, madam.
The funnier aspect of the acting and writing is that nobody ever acts like the animal they're portraying. The fact that everybody is a talking animal is completely irrelevant, in fact. They're all just normal folks. This dissonance is what makes a lot of the game so damn funny. Take Winklebottom himself, whose portrayal as a serious and analytical detective of renown and sophistication constantly contrasts with being a pipe-smoking giraffe.
Oh.
Let's look at the main suspects. Beryl Clutterbuck, seemingly the late Admiral's humble maid, or perhaps something more? Did she seek the Admiral's attentions only to be rejected? Would such a humiliation drive her to seek revenge? Dame Celia Wellington Boot, star of the stage and famous entertainer. Rumors abound of shocking actions that derailed her illustrious career. Is she a fated star quite on the decline, or is it all an act to protect her secrets? Constance Gilfrey, the Admiral's daughter. Having lost both her mother and father, she stands to gain a large inheritance that would surely benefit her suitor, Sir Winslet. Is she the innocent party she appears to be? Madame Lavinia, a spirit medium who claims to be able to speak to the dead. She seems to be doubting her own abilities of late. How far would she go to prevent her exposure as a fraud? Dr. Vivian Price, an embittered scientist who is tired of fading into the background of a man's world. Would her unfair treatment at the hands of her colleagues and former employer be reason enough to kill? Ulysses Spode, seemingly an indifferent solicitor summoned to handle legal matters on behalf of Gilfrey's estate. But can there be more to him than meets the eye? Ambrose, Gilfrey's reliable butler. Or is he? Where has the supposedly faithful servant vanished to? And why? Sir Winslet, a down-on-his-luck feline who has been turned away by his own prestigious family to a life of cash poorness. Does he truly love Constance, or is there another more lucrative motivation for staying by her side? Reverend Archibald Peabody, a servant of the Lord who might not be all he claims to be. Even the clergy cannot be above suspicion. Could the hushed whispers of his checkered past be true? Pumphrey, the Admiral's gardener who believes he was about to be sacked, belligerent and prone to angry outbursts. Is he capable of murder as well as munching the garden he tends? If you've been paying attention, you'll notice that there are only 7 voice actors to play the 20 different characters in this game. Stating this doesn't do as much justice as listening to the performances over the course of playing.
Oh my god. Frumple, look at this is terrible.
What? What is it?
They're keeping red wine in the refrigerator. This is sacrilege.
Oh, is that all? I thought you found something important.
Well, my lord, there's the start off. That's myself and Ambrose, the butler. The gong over there should summon him. Also Pumphrey, the gardener, though he's been moping around outside of late. Miserable old sod it is. Oh, sorry, my lord.
Do you know anything about what happened?
Not a thing, darling. I hid away in here when I arrived. It gets so tiresome being in public, you know. So many questions, demands for autographs and all.
I remember a flash, a child. Then I was blown here on the wind.
Typical. She missed out on my bit.
First mother and now this. I think we must have done something unspeakable in a past life to suffer so much pain in this one. Don't you agree, Lord Winklebottom?
The Sharkspere play. Macbeth. Actors are terrified of it. Think Sharkspere will come and eat them if it's even mentioned, or something like that.
Strange, the maid didn't mention other stuff.
No, she wouldn't. People tend to forget about me, you see, Mr. Winklebottom. Sometimes I think I might as well just blend into the scenery.
It bleeding well isn't a good day. That reprobate Waters has locked me out of my own pub. I do apologise, sir. Shouldn't take it out on you like, but he's going to drink me out of business if I don't get back in there to stop him.
Ulysses Spode of Spode, and Flabbernacle At your service, sir. Well, sure, it was like this. I was in the attic sorting through a few of the master's belongings. It's awful messy up there, so I've taken it upon myself to do a spot of spring cleaning.
Hey, get your pilfering paws off those glasses. They be mine, you hear?
Well, quiet, old thing. Families, eh, Winklebottom? More belly trouble than they're worth. We'd be better off without them. Oh, sorry, Constable.
Bugger. I just knew it had come out at some point.
Oh, as I live and breathe, it's Lord Winklebottom. Oh, am I glad to see you, sir.
Well, not exactly my kettle of fish, you know, but I suppose for you land dwellers it's a useful contraption.
That layabout. Oh, I know him all right, but you'll not be going anywhere with him till he pays his docking fees. Nobody leaves this dock without my say-so. No docking fees, no permit to leave.
Oh, delightful, are they? That's rich, isn't it? Delightful, he calls them, after he's been helping himself to some of my award-winning shrubbery.
You can tell the cast is having a hell of a lot of fun showing off their range.
God be with you, my son.
Oh, rather. I mean, jolly rotten luck and all, but she'll be a rich woman now.
Well, spit out. What be you wanting, stranger?
If you've ever heard bad voice acting, you'll understand what I mean. These guys don't take you out of the game. The direction was very obviously to do what I said earlier, which is to play the material completely seriously. And the cast does this beautifully, knowing fully well what they're trying to accomplish. There are certainly moments of intentionally comedic delivery to sell a joke.
Greetings.
You are Lord Winklebottom, are you not?
I say, that's amazing. Did you see all that in your crystal ball? Or a message from the spirits, perhaps?
No, I saw an article about you in the newspaper earlier today.
Oh, well, yes, I suppose that would also work.
Anyway.
But ignoring the fact everybody is playing a talking animal, there's not one of these actors that isn't giving 100% effort to the performance. And you can really tell.
Oh, Lord Winklebottom, it was terrible, a simply frightful thing.
I say, steady on. What are you talking about?
Out there, Dr. Frumple, out in the dark, it was a creature, a thing. I've never seen such a ghastly sight.
The game's press specifically called out the individual English dialects, and if you've got an ear for different accents, there is some fun stuff here.
All right, I ate the old bloody lot. I mean, I can't help it, can I? It's in my bloody nature, isn't it?
It's worth noting how good the performances are. Like, really. Sometimes you'll hear very bored or workmanlike performances in even AAA titles.
You've done some great work for us up to this point, and we're hoping to use your unique abilities to aid us once again.
Here, I was awestruck by how much everybody is genuinely acting in this game.
Spirits, if you are with us, chime a bell so that we may know.
With gusto, subtlety, and enthusiasm. Not one line is wasted. The right words are emphasized, emotion comes through, each performance is a joy to listen to.
I say speak up! Oh, you young people do mumble so.
And if you go back after you know the ending and do it again, you'll notice some subtle hints that were given away just with the acting. And once I realized that, you start to notice how much depth there is to the voice work, which is enough to make you overlook the kinda dodgy talking cycles. Also, I think our title giraffe himself deserves a special mention. So, James Sutherland, the developer's husband and programming ninja apparently, says he hasn't really done much VO. I'm still not sure if that's a modest joke, because by the end of the game, you won't believe that, and I still don't believe it. As the giraffe of action, James has the bulk of the dialogue and performance in the game, and not only does he play Lord Winklebottom as an affable and immediately likable protagonist, with his nasally pitch and genial good nature, but I want you to note the subtlety and variation of his performance, especially when reacting to significant plot moments or emoting.
Gilfrey, dead, but this doesn't make any sense. He was in the prime of his life. The fellow was as strong as an ox.
For somebody without a lot of voice experience, his character is conveyed perfectly and performed with depth and variation.
Seems that I might have a use for this after all.
But that's not why this guy blew me away. All the performances are consistently good. No, when the credits finally roll, I want you to note that this guy who plays Lord Winklebottom also plays Frumple.
Oh yes, this will definitely hold the combined weight of a giraffe and a hippo. Absolutely no danger here.
Just stop for a moment. Let me explain why this is just the icing on an already delicious cake. See, Winklebottom's tone and character traits are almost the exact opposite of the sarcastic and baritone Frumple. That kind of range is immediately impressive to begin with, but that also means that this dude was talking to himself, reacting in character to his own performance 100 times throughout the game, and still managed to make it completely natural, charismatic, and seamless.
Genius. Or insanity. Honestly, I'm not sure which.
Perhaps both, my friend.
In fact, he apparently did all the male voices in the original demo before the rest of the cast was hired, and voicing Winklebottom was an artifact of early development they just stuck with. I'd like to point that out because it's really just funny as hell to me. Only married people will understand. Do I get somebody else to play the lead? Nah, hubby is fine and he's free. When I talked to her for the first time, Charlotte jokingly told me she's concerned my praise will mean she has to pay him now. So actually, terrible actor, amateur delivery, awful job. Worst part of the game.
I'm really starting to feel that you have no confidence in my abilities.
This also means that the late and unhinged scene of Winklebottom and Frumple acting like complete drunken fools due to being poisoned is even funnier in retrospect. I'll come back to that too, because it's absolutely the goofiest thing I've seen in, like, forever. But anyway, not to single out one particular player here, the voice direction and performances are absolutely top tier. It's also evidence of just how much was put into this game about a giraffe detective solving a murder. Oh, speaking of which... Actually, no, let's talk about the poisoning scene. Towards the end of the game, our two heroes are poisoned by one of the villains.
Ouch, something bloody well stabbed me.
What results is one of the funniest scenes in a video game that I've ever encountered, as our two composed and dignified English protagonists are reduced to drunken insanity, slurred speech, absolutely unhinged dialogue that's like nothing else in the rest of the game, and a psychedelic, wavering screen that makes clicking on anything an accomplishment, as if you're drugged out of your mind along with Winklebottom and Frumple. Even the music becomes stoned.
I hope this tastes better than it looks. No, it was worse.
Remember how I said the game has this ability to shift from serious to solemn to ridiculous and back again without sacrificing the mood? This delightful madness occurs immediately after one of the more sobering moments of the whole narrative before dropping you into the conclusion and hitting the player with a lot of really dark stuff. According to Charlotte, she just intended to lighten the mood.
Give me a moment, I need to think in my head. Ah, I know.
It's so hilariously out of left field in comparison to the rest of this game that I had to sit there and force myself to stop laughing just to keep playing. Here's some footage to help explain.
Frumple, look, it's a table.
Oh, maybe we could hold a nice dinner party. I'm rather hungry. Are you hungry?
Frumple, look, it's a table.
And finally, here's my favorite moment, where Winklebottom suddenly, in a drug-induced madness, becomes self-aware of how he's been describing everything out loud for our benefit for just one line of dialogue.
Oh, hello, it's Dr. Frumple. Hello, Doctor.
Hello.
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 That's Dr. Frumple. I say, just who am I talking to when I say things like this?
This joke, this was comedy gold for me. I appreciated this so much. Contextually, your main characters are currently dying of poisoning and have moments to live as they desperately try to cobble together an antidote. This is the only true fourth wall break in the entire game, by the way. It killed me. I'm talking having to pull off my headphones to wipe away tears of joy. True to form, however, amidst the wackiness, we learned a lot about Frumple's character that makes the big idiot more lovable. See, it wasn't just blatantly random nonsense. It had a point. But also it was blatantly random nonsense. As the last player controllable moment in the game, this is actually the lead-on to the climax of the story, and that makes it even funnier, because the ending is dark. And now back to the review. Back in the old days, you had a limited palette to use and you could imply a lot of detail and shading in your sprites, but not a lot of actual on-screen detail due to technical limitations. So to get around this, the artist would use higher res talking head portraits and elaborate sprite animations. It's a quaint style now, and some developers will invoke it as a purposely retro aesthetic. So, sure, you could have still pulled off this game with low-res pixel art to capture the look of the genre the game is calling back. But Charlotte is a working artist. Why bother hiring somebody when you can do it yourself? Her style has this warmth and use of color that is bright and inviting, with proportions and details being just a bit exaggerated. I'll call it comical realism. So, let's talk about the artwork and visual design. The digitally drawn backgrounds are the first thing I want to point out, because you'll be seeing them again and again as you move through the game's rooms. That's not a bad thing. They're richly detailed. In fact, everything, including your inventory items, has been lovingly hand-drawn. I read a review that said the art style in Winklebottom looks like it's out of a storybook. I agree. Amusingly, I was reminded of Jim Gurney's Dinotopia, one of my other favorite things ever, where he takes the somewhat ludicrous concept of talking dinosaurs and fanciful technology and then skillfully represents it with the visuals so it's not as ludicrous. Same thing here, right down to scenes set in particular color tones. If you're an artist, this is just stuff you do unconsciously after years of doing it. There's nothing special here. Now, design. This actually ties back into the gameplay, so I'll explain what I mean in more detail. In keeping with the traditions of this genre, the player has to pick up items for their inventory and click on everything they can interact with. Graphically, this means that the construction of the scenes, props, objects, and background has to be very carefully considered and intuitive to the gameplay itself. You can't just draw the scene with a bunch of stuff and detail thrown everywhere and go, okay, done, because it's not a static image. It has to be interacted with. There's more than a few notorious puzzle solutions in these games that required the player to realize that there's an object they needed located in the background in a really obscure spot you wouldn't have noticed, or partially hidden, or the background itself has one select feature you need to do something with. The opposite end of this is when the scene is cluttered with a bunch of stuff that serves absolutely no purpose or interaction. It's a wasted opportunity then, and you're eating up memory and the player's time with stuff they can't do anything with. So a level of intuitive graphical design is key to these games, and it has to be consistent from scene to scene or you'll risk annoying your player. Nothing spells death for an adventure game like an annoyed player who isn't having fun. Key here is the balance between art and gameplay. We brought this up earlier, but it really does matter immensely. So the scene design in Lord Winklebottom hits this balance perfectly. Like really, from an art perspective, it couldn't be better. I brought up earlier that the cursor calls attention to background objects that are obviously meant to be interacted with while ignoring things you don't need to worry about. It's for your sake. As the player, you know there's not going to be some hidden thing tucked away that you missed, and what you need to look at and do is clearly communicated. What this is doing as you're playing is actually guiding you and keeping you on task with what you're supposed to be doing instead of letting you wander around clicking on stuff that has nothing to do with the puzzle you're trying to solve. It's also, as I said, consistent with the overall design. Nothing is worse than the game breaking its own established rules to mess with you, even for one joke. Now, take the front entrance of Gilfrey's estate, where we see an impression of a key in some mud. You think, I have to do something with that? Pretty simple setup, obvious puzzle to solve. The location also serves the purpose of meeting a character, setting the mood, establishing the main location you're in, and explaining that there's a big storm going on outside when you get there and why you can't just leave to notify the mainland after the phone is disconnected. The visuals do all the heavy lifting in telling the story. We don't need a bunch of expository narrative to explain what we can see. The nice thing about this is that as the player, the developer expects you're smart enough to take the information you need without throwing dialogue boxes at your face. And that's also just one example. So, off to the first big room that you encounter when you get there. There's lots of things to look at and interact with, yes, but take note of the big portraits on the wall. You'll likely gravitate to those first to see what they are. Admiral Gilfrey is front and center, the largest portrait, reminding you of why you're here and how important he is in the overall story. Something that draws your attention like that is called a focal point, and calls out something you should notice in the artwork. That's just 2 game screens with multiple story events and tasks to complete, but all of them are like this. Being set in a late 1800s mansion for the most part, which isn't exactly a dynamic location, there was a real risk of boring and dark scenes. But everything is colorful and interesting. This is where I really call out Charlotte's personal style, and she favors warm, bright color choices that complement each other. The result is that nothing in the game looks drab or dim. Just look at the basement, bathed in shadow while still having warm and inviting colors. And it's that warmth and vibrancy that matches the tone of the game as a comedy. You are subconsciously being told to feel a certain way. Anyway, these are just a couple examples of the art design, and it's good, and it's all over the place. This game could have easily hired somebody with basic synthesizer skills to knock off the soundtrack on the cheap, but instead, they used actual recorded instruments played by real people and directed by a composer. This brings a classical and timeless sound to the game's music that completely blew me away, because I love good soundtracks. The composer, Gustavo Cuccinio, I'm so sorry man, I am a white boy from the Canadian prairies, is somebody else who is just insanely good. You know what else he scored? Payday 2. One of the sniper games, A Walking Dead. You know, basically as far from this lighthearted title as you can get, and he gets a chance to shine here. Okay, music. What you have is Winklebottom's main theme serving as the leitmotif for most of the tracks in the game. You know why 30 years later we still remember all the music from 007 GoldenEye? It's because each level's music was a variation on the James Bond theme. Same thing here. That's an incredibly oversimplified explanation of a leitmotif, and yes, I'm suggesting Winklebottom needs to become a British spy. The main theme is gentle, whimsical, and just a little quirky. It perfectly captures the spirit of the game and is adaptable to multiple moods and circumstances. I hum it all the time now. Thanks a lot. There's moments of intrigue or suspense with amusingly over-the-top brass, which are what I took to be intentionally cheesy. But in the more dramatic moments the game goes for, the music appropriately becomes somber, melancholy, and a little sad. Special mention goes to the eerie track playing over the graveyard, with ghostly vocals and an oddly unsettling tune. It's just damn good musical composition. Somewhere, Danny Elfman is smiling. Sound design is, as with everything else, well executed. This isn't a game where you're constantly blasting off assault rifles at big scary aliens, so the background ambience of the scenes you're in, especially as you visit them over and over again, is very important and subtle. Let's take the pub in the prologue. Turn off first the music, and then the background, and see what a difference it makes. See what I mean? Atmosphere. Most of the action in the game involves moving to different rooms or picking something up. So besides doors opening and closing, a switch here or there being thrown, or the odd swing of a very useful kitchen knife, there's not a lot of need for constant sound effects. But what's there is perfectly fine, well chosen, and appropriate. Nothing out of place or jarring. Now, we're about to get into the heavy spoiler stuff. Alright. So originally, as written, this was a nearly 20-minute sequence where I provided some technical analysis and essay-length fan theorizing. But after an interview with the creator of this game, I learned I was totally off base and approaching deeper stuff that was indeed intended to be there from the wrong angle. So good news for you, I guess. If you don't want the whole damn game to be spoiled completely in detail, then skip ahead to this time code. The first thing I want to talk about is the stuff I couldn't talk about before. So, off we go. In a good, solidly written story, events that occur in the plot set up later events that will pay off later. When I said that Winklebottom had truly great writing, I meant it. One of the first clues that there's something else going on in this game is communicated very early on, and you probably missed it, because it seems like a throwaway gag for our amusement.
Can't rightly say. Something about primates. It's the eyes, I think. Something in them is almost not animal. Good grief, look at his eyes. They look even more soulless than the real thing.
What is it with you and primates, Frumple?
See, Frumple has two instances of noting how creepy primates are, and both of them play off as the talking animal version of the uncanny valley. If you've never experienced this freaky sensation, it's when something like a CGI character, a Photoshop of a dog with human teeth, or a piece of artwork is just off enough that it triggers some weird fear response in your brain that flags it as not human, and makes you aware that something isn't quite right and you should feel very uneasy. Frumple is having an uncanny valley moment over something that doesn't look completely animal, and specifically mentions how unsettling the eyes of primates are. In fact, from the perspective of humans, that's exactly how we tend to describe some apes, as looking like us but not looking like us. Hence the uncanny valley. This is played as a funny joke, but it's actually preparing you for the twist ending about 4.5 hours in advance. Another hint comes from the name of the island that Gilfrey lives on. It's the island of Barghest. This is a reference that might be lost on a lot of the North American audience, but if you're a mythology enthusiast and know some legends and scary stories from the British Isles, then you'd know the Barghest as a terrifying demon that typically takes the form of a shadowy black devil dog with glowing eyes.
It's daft, really, I suppose, but the Barghest is a ferocious monster sent to roam the island at night. It's part dog, part monster. Say that anybody who sees it will surely die soon after.
Seeing the Barghest foretells death, which is specifically how Maid Clutterbuck relays the legend. And this would be just a piece of British culture creeping into the game were it not for the fact that this exchange occurs after Salty and Constance claim to have terrifying encounters with some kind of creature. That very creature, if you're paying attention, can be seen lurking in the background of the exterior scene beyond the orangery after this event. And while at this point you might assume the silhouette is some never-do-well or one of the characters lurking about in the rainstorm, if you do see it, it's worth noting that this jet black thing perfectly represents the legendary Barghest as a shadowy demon. More on that in a moment. First, let's go through the reveal, and then we'll tie it all together. The twist of this game could have very well wound up as a punch to the face of the player. It's a pretty good M. Night ending, actually. What a twist! You've just played this mostly goofy, mostly funny video game about a giraffe solving a murder, and now you're down to the big reveal.
As you all know, my good friend Admiral Gilfrey died last night. After investigating his death, myself and Dr. Frumple have determined that it was no accident. Somebody wanted Gilfrey silenced, and they wanted it so badly that they'd resorted to murder.
It starts with the moment we finally crack Gilfrey's secret safe and discover what his big announcement was. We find a single intact human skull and some papers that Dr. Price mentioned earlier. Coupled with the fact we know somebody has been going through the house looking for documents, this is clearly what they were looking for. And so if you've been very clever in your deduction, the conclusion might be that Price killed Gilfrey and Mr. Spode, who was specifically there to go through Gilfrey's documents, is her accomplice. The game has this delightful moment where Winklebottom expects the killer to reveal themselves when presented with the evidence, which is usually what happens in these stories. Instead, it's Inspector Culver who reveals that Spode is an imposter, and in turn, Spode reveals himself as the mastermind and Price as his accomplice. And then things get weird. After chasing the two antagonists down to the lighthouse we first saw on our way to the island, we're first greeted by the shambling two-legged horror that turns out to be the shadowy figure we saw earlier. Note my lord's reaction to the sight of a human figure.
Frumple, look. What's that coming through the mist?
I say, I don't much care for that thing. What on earth is it?
My God, Frumple. It's an abomination.
Winklebottom and Frumple break into the lighthouse, and they discover a really creepy mad scientist-type lair complete with Frankenstein shock table, glowing beakers of fluid, and what are clearly failed attempts at making the human we just encountered. Oh, and also the real Spode. Somebody should probably come back for him when this is all over. And this is when, out of nowhere, Price emerges and poisons our heroes, explaining in no uncertain terms what's actually going on and why. She drops all pretense of her quirky and awkward personality, and we see her as a cold-blooded and ruthless creature. A reptile, huh? What do you have against reptiles, Charlotte? It's important to note that the character who is complicit in the murder of an innocent victim and who just poisoned our likable protagonist speaks of the just revealed human race with reverence for how they were like gods. The title of Act 3 is Gods and Monsters. Remember this detail because it's going to be key to understanding what the game is actually saying. Finally, after the lab, we confront the fake Mr. Spode and he spills the plot, revealing that he's just an agent for a bigger organization that want to keep the existence of the human race a secret. Because it turns out there's a shadowy Illuminati-style organization that built the foundation of animal society upon that which came before, meaning us. Oh no. Turns out that all this time we haven't been in an alternate 1920s at all. This world of talking animals is the world that follows after all of humanity dies off. And there's a secret power structure in control of the world that wants to keep everything exactly the way it is. This is the big twist, and like the rest of the game, it's delivered with an even hand. The real danger here was that this could have come off as an overly political soapbox moment referencing some contemporary issue. And in my opinion, if we had gone this way, it would have ruined the whole game. Slamming that kind of heavy-handed message into the player's face when we were just enjoying a lighthearted comedy a few minutes ago would have been a big middle finger from the developer. Instead, it's delivered with the same quality writing and care that the rest of the game has been delivered in. We don't specifically learn what caused humanity's destruction. We get references to terrible wars and some apocalyptic event that drove humanity underground. But Charlotte gives us a timeless critique of human nature itself. She doesn't linger on it too long either, because again, this was set up very early on. We're going to deep dive on this a little more in the next bit, just bear with me. It turns out that this was also the point of the game. It's done so effectively that I really can't convey in words how it made me feel the first time. This game came out in one of the worst and most depressing years I've ever lived through. I played it in October of 2022 when things just seemed to be getting worse and worse, and it looked like we were absolutely determined as a species to end the whole of our civilization. The terror in watching everything fall down has been absolutely soul-crushing. This dumb, funny, talking giraffe game made me feel something I hadn't felt for nearly 2 years at that point. Things were bad, but they can always be worse. As long as we're still here, hanging in, there's still a chance to fix things. This game has some really deep stuff going on. First, let's start with Dr. Price. This might be the most obvious one, and it's presented fairly early on. This poor lady has been driven to become a bad guy because of overt sexism and being consistently underappreciated by her male peers. She notes in exasperation she can't even get a properly sized lab coat. Her drive is to be recognized for her work, which in turn makes her do unethical and immoral things to prove herself as a scientist. You do have sympathy for her right up until she tries to callously kill our heroes, but even still, her motivations are tragic and relatable. I can already feel you right-wingers out there in the audience rolling your eyes at the woke messaging, but hear me out. See, the thing is, this isn't a politically motivated left or right message. Basically, the game is part commentary on how rotten society is. Recall that the game sets up a malevolent secret organization determined to maintain control of the people. Recall that the pub owner from the prologue is clearly dissatisfied by his life, that Sir Winslet has been abandoned by his upper-crust family for the crime of wanting to do something different than what was expected of him, that Gilfrey was killed because he was a good guy who was an explorer and he wanted to share independent knowledge outside of the system, that Dame Celia is kind of a jackass who has been rewarded with fame and wealth, that the clergyman in this game has done something really sketchy that he feels he has to spend the rest of his life paying for, that Maid Clutterbuck had unrequited love for Gilfrey after Ethelbert had died and couldn't get up the courage to approach him because she was just a lowly servant, and that Frumple was bullied mercilessly as a kid, which is why he's such a sarcastic jerk at times. Price could have been male or another character altogether. It's about the fact that people are often mistreated or unhappy as a symptom of the world we inhabit, and nobody does anything about it. That's a pretty fair and sensible observation. So next, the aftermath of Madame Lavinia's seance. Basically, we had a spirit medium who isn't actually sure she can summon spirits. Turns out, she can. Frumple's skeptical mind is blown when the fake seance they rig up to expose the killer goes horribly, horribly right. Then, something kind of profound happens. We meet what is very specifically perhaps not the living spirit of the departed Ethelberta herself, but a faint memory. This is left partially ambiguous, and you can read what you like into it yourself. For me, I took the implication that our soul is merely the culmination of what we experience in our life. Notice we're told she has only memories and nothing more. When I first played through, this was a weirdly touching moment for me. It made me ponder the idea that what we leave behind for others and the joys we experience ourselves are what really matter. So, that twist! As we established earlier, Admiral Gilfrey brought a bunch of seemingly unrelated animals together to make a big announcement. It's hinted at early on that this could be a number of things, from exposing the dark secrets of the guests present to some seemingly impossible to know motive. But we have a bunch of, oh, of course moments interspersed through the narrative that will make complete sense only when you find out what the actual answer is. Because, you see, this is a comedic game with a message about how absolutely off the rails humankind has gone, and how if we keep doing what we're doing, we're all gonna die. Yeah. The reason he was killed is that Gilfrey mounted a bunch of private archaeological expeditions, likely prompted by finding strange artifacts during his travels around the world, and discovered what are said to be ancient remains from a long-extinct species of animal that can't be identified. As we've already established, that animal is, of course, us. Gilfrey was intending to unveil his discovery of human beings to all of animal kind, assembling figures of influence together to help him bring this world-changing information to the general public, and he was murdered to keep the secret. And Gilfrey was murdered by an agent working for the Bureau of Animal Control, which, as well as being a great joke, is what I expect to be the shadowy elite of this world. Their purpose is to suppress the truth of their own origins and maintain the rigid power structure of their society, and thus control over it. You see, the intelligent animals that followed people have co-opted our traditions and history as their own, which includes all of our darker tendencies. All through the story, you might have thought that the more uncomfortable moments were a byproduct of the period of time the game was set in, but it's directly just a byproduct of carrying on human ideas themselves, complete with a corrupt power structure designed to maintain control over the ignorant populace just trying to live their lives. Make of that what you will. This is conveyed, by the way, without specific political context, without directly saying it, calling out any one group as evil or righteous, and done in a minimal fashion that alludes to the self-destructive faults of human nature itself. That is how to deliver an impacting and important message to the audience without being a pretentious know-it-all. Take notes, literally everybody else. Just to twist the knife a little, it turns out that Mr. Spode, the Toad, is not Spode at all, but an imposter working with the scientist, Dr. Price, to make sure that the reveal of humankind's existence never leaves the island and that Price's unholy mad science does. You see, Price has been secretly reverse engineering a human from available genetic material discovered by Gilfrey's expeditions. The resultant human is treated as a terrible monster, a mindless abomination, and a horrific nightmare by all who see it. It's pretty obvious what she's saying here, and it comes as a 1-2 narrative punch in the last moments of the game, as both Price and Fake Spode reverently explain that the humans fought terrible conflicts and had the admirable traits of power, order, and control. The villains in this game who have killed somebody look up to the absolutely awful human beings as models to emulate. Gods and monsters, both simultaneously. That's the human race. Suddenly, depicting the human creature that we see in the game as the mythical Bargus that foretells death is very on the nose. Side note, the only act of direct on-screen violence in the game is Fake Spode pulling a gun on our heroes and threatening to murder everybody on the island in cold blood to make sure there's no threat to the power structure. The power structure inspired by humanity. Yeah, that checks out. Also, much to my amusement, I realized afterward that this was a reference to the time-honored, the most dangerous animal cliché present in pulp science fiction, which the ending takes a clear dive into. That pretty much sums up the brilliance of this game. It has many layers.
I have combined the DNA of the world's most evil animals to make the most evil creature of them all.
It turns out it's man.
So, with all this on the table, what Charlotte is saying is that if we keep going the way we're going right now, that's all we're going to be known for when we do eventually manage to destroy our entire species. Not if, when. All that will be left are monuments and bones for whoever comes after us, which begs the question, have we actually evolved? Have we actually progressed as a species? Or are we no better or worse than seemingly lesser animals? What legacy do we want to leave behind? It's a pretty heavy question asked in an even-handed way. After I was done playing the first time, what was being said hit me in full, and I couldn't believe that this theme was pulled off as effectively as it was in an adventure game about a talking friggin' giraffe. Then I reasoned that this was, again, a textbook comedy that used jokes and humor to soften the blow of an important thing that needs to be restated right now. What with a brutal territorial war raging in Europe, Western society and the global economy on the verge of collapse, a wealthy elite prancing around while the world burns, claiming they're the models of moral decency, and the potential for our own self-annihilation growing more probable by the week. The usage of talking animals instead of people becomes less ridiculous in retrospect. I've noticed that in a couple of early interviews and the official development blog, Charlotte specifically pointed this out as the classical allegory it was meant to be. So to give her the credit she deserves, this is a larger metaphor for how we, throughout human society, pretend to be civilized and cultured when really, deep down, we're all just animals playing dress-up. One last time, this game manages to pull off comedy and deeper moments in virtually the same scene. This is true here as well, and we don't linger on this downer ending for too terribly long before a few more jokes play out in between the credits. The final result is that the messaging didn't leave a rancid taste in my mouth, feel like it ruined the experience of playing the game. It wasn't tacked on, it was organic to the plot, and it wasn't insulting to the audience. It didn't make me never want to touch this again like another indie game featuring a talking animal detective that I played last year. I'll talk about that someday, but I'll need to work up the backbone. In closing, this is a game that works on different levels. If you're in it for the goofy comedy, there's plenty of that. If you're in it for the playful deconstruction of tropes and cliches, there's that too. If you want a good murder mystery that will keep you guessing to the end, you've got that. And if you want quality writing and deeper themes that will leave you thinking about what you just experienced, there's also that. In any case, this is an enjoyable way to spend about 4 to 5 hours of your time, it's family friendly, and I cannot recommend it enough. It's damn fine art, plain and simple. If there's any justice in the world, Lord Winklebottom Investigates should be justifiably regarded as one of the most unique indie games of all time and an inspiration for other artists of what can be done with a small dedicated team and a drive to see something through. There's about a dozen people who were involved in this whole thing, a small marketing team and only one main developer. This game is on par with the best of the old school point and clicks. It wouldn't be out of place in the library of LucasArts, Interplay, or Sierra. And it's so wonderfully quirky that I can't imagine it would ever have been made any other way. And the crowdfunding model has produced some of my favorite things of the last decade. Dedicated investors like those of Wings recognize the value of giving unique voices to independent creators who can't put down the cold hard cash on their own. I'm hoping this is the first of many adventures we'll share with Lord Winklebottom, the third, and I look forward to whatever cave monsters and thus Lady Sea Dog can pull off next. Anyway, not bad for a 90s style point-and-click adventure murder mystery comedy starring a lovable talking giraffe. Yeah, giraffes, they're comedy gold, and they have an unexpected wisdom from standing at a much different perspective. Ooh, see how deep that was? Until next time, it's your boy, Gee-Gee the Giraffe, and I'll see you for the next Giraffe Reviews. Maybe it won't be as long as this one, though. 32 single-space 12-point pages, guys. Go play this goddamn game. I bled for this. Hey, viewer! Great job on watching a video by the Gentleman Giraffe. The province of Alberta thanks you. Why not follow me on my social media under the tag @Gee-Giraffe? We've also got a Patreon. And finally, just a sec, like and subscribe or else. Did you happen to notice what year the BAC stopped keeping track of humans? That's it, gang. Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
My, oh my. No, this won't do. This won't do at all.